Right, lots to cover, so let's make a start. Welcome everyone, thank you very much for joining us this afternoon. A little bit about myself, I'm Vishal Ladwa, end user computing consultant at PowerON platforms. I've been in IT for over 10 years, dealing with a wide range of customers in the public and private sector, which has taken me all over the globe. I primarily focus on predominantly Microsoft-based end user computing solutions to provide monitored management and enterprise mobility capabilities, leveraging Azure, Config Manager, and Intune platforms, and all that good stuff. I joined PowerON Platform 6 months ago within their consultancy practice, and so far it's been an amazing experience to work for this company. Just before we get started, quick update on who PowerON Platforms are. We like to say that we're formed by a collection of industry veterans. We've written a lot of the cookbooks on some of the System Center products, and we're a company that's very much focused on the IT management and the automation of private and public cloud, be it hybrid or on-premises. PowerON's strengths is in the automated management of systems across these platforms. We're very much a business-led rather than a technology-led company to provide solutions which meet the business requirements rather than installing the latest and greatest products to ensure you get the right return on your investment. So today's webinar, how does Windows 10 help support GDPR? Well, we're going to go into defining GDPR, generally what is it and what it means. What are the implications for non-compliance and how does this regulation affect you? Then we'll look more closely at the wider, broad set of major GDPR requirements and make you aware how you can start planning to address the requirements. Then we can look at the features that are available in Windows 10 that can be leveraged to help you achieve GDPR compliance against those important requirements. Finally, we'll look at how PowerON can help you on your path to GDPR compliance from the endpoint to the data center right through to the cloud. So what is GDPR? So let's look at some of the key facts of GDPR. So General Data Protection Regulation, GDPR. This is a new set of protection regulations coming into Europe next year in May 2018. So the GDPR regulations come into force on the 25th of May 2018 next year. So we do have a little bit of time to plan for it to ensure that we can meet the GDPR regulations. Is there a grace period? There is no grace period, so it will be a hard enforcement come May 2018. The penalties for non-compliance are severe. Organizations that fail to comply could face substantial fines of up to 4% of global annual turnover or 20 million euros, whichever is higher, as well as suffering the reputational damage. Therefore, it's clear GDPR needs to be a high priority in your agenda for 2018 and the rest of 2017 as well. A common misconception is this is something that doesn't affect you because you're not in Europe or your company operates in Asia or Australia. That's actually incorrect. So in essence, any company that provides goods and services to Europeans, no matter where they are in the world, and specifically requires you to collect personal and private information on those citizens. Any organization that does those type of things will be subject to GDPR requirements. How many hours after a breach has been detected should the issue be reported to the relevant authority? Well, the answer is 72 hours. A notifiable breach has to be reported to the relevant supervisory authority and also to the customer within 72 hours of the organization becoming aware of it. And how does Brexit impact UK's adoption of GDPR? Well, GDPR will come into force on the 25th of May 2018 when the UK is likely to still be in the EU. Although post-Brexit GDPR is applicable in the UK for businesses providing goods and services to the EU. So in a nutshell, General Data Protection Regulation, GDPR, imposes new rules on organizations with regards to data privacy and protection. GDPR has a broad range of requirements. However, there are a couple of important pieces that you need to understand. So number one, the GDPR provides European citizens specifically with enhanced privacy rights. It's quite different with what we're used to today in the UK with the UK Data Protection Act. Secondly, the GDPR is designed to put the responsibility back on the organization, so in terms of protecting the customer's data. Now, not to be mistaken, organizations today usually always take data privacy very seriously and take the appropriate measures to secure customer data. But GDPR puts the responsibility from a legal standpoint on the organizations to take ownership of protecting the customer's data. And the third point, GDPR introduces things like mandatory breach reporting. So this requires 72-hour reporting from when you've discovered that breach. This is typically a very difficult task for organizations to achieve. So a big part of this is planning. What are the things I need to do and are available to provide the actual response plans to meet that 72-hour requirement. So all this needs to be put in place and be documented. How can you leverage the current technology you have to help you meet those requirements, which may already exist or need to be implemented? And the fourth point is one of the main reasons that GDPR compliance is important, that we've already touched upon, and that will probably grab your attention, is that the fines for non-compliance are very severe, up to 4% of global revenue, or 20 million euros, whichever is higher, as well as suffering that reputational damage. So let's look more closely at the wider, broad set of major GDPR requirements. Firstly is personal privacy. So the first requirement is GDPR brings a number of items that organizations typically don't actually do today in general terms, in general practices. So a customer can come to you and say, I want to know about all the data that you hold on me, and I want to be able to see it and be able to make any corrections on that data. So now you need to actually understand what data you hold for the people, where is it located in case you need to change it, understand what are the protections that are already in place for that, and what context is the data actually being used within your business. The second requirement is that the customer has the right to be forgotten. So, in other words, you have to be in a position to be able to collect all their data and remove it from your systems, and also you have to prove that you have actually removed it from your systems. So today, have you got that ability to do that? So with GDPR, you have a legal obligation to be in a position to prove and demonstrate that you have the capability that you're handling that data correction and removal, not only from a compliance perspective, but from an operational perspective, where you have the ability to actually follow through with those actions, collect and present customer data, and also able to amend and erase it as well. So the next requirement is transparent policies. So what this means is today we collect customer data and use it to provide products and services to customers. But what GDPR enforces is you can only use that data for the purposes that it was meant to be used for in the first place. That you started in the original collection of that data. So there will be restrictions there with for example, reusing customer data for marketing campaigns. If that was not the original intention when that data was gathered, then that is not going to be allowed. Indeed, if it's European citizen data. Another thing is around data retention policy. So how long do you intend to keep the data for? How is it backed up? where is that data located? All these types of things need to be clearly defined and documented. Next thing that comes into place with GDPR is training of people. So there is a requirement that all organizations with 250 plus employees are now going to have to employ their own data protection officer. So organizations will over 250 employees will need to work on employing a data protection officer. So another requirement on the back of this is implementation of privacy impact assessments. So things like what are the consequences if that data is leaked, be it intentionally or unintentionally? How would this impact the customer in the event of data being leaked? And how is that data currently protected? So now we have to define details on procedures, how data is being handled, how your breach notification is being handled, and how you're going to prevent breaches from happening that result in data leakage. So, how do you start preparing for GDPR given this time next year it will be in full force? Well, think of the following 4 slides as 4 steps that must be addressed to become GDPR compliant. The first step is understanding what data you have. So you might already be doing these things in general, such as identifying what information is being stored about the customer. So this could be sensitive. So it could be email, their ethnicity, biological information like genetics, for example, medical information, bank information such as credit card details, account details, etc. And also identifying where it is being stored and located in your environment. So, for example, messaging for your email, documents, databases, log files, removable media. This needs to be defined, and also identifying who has access to these data. So this could be in the cloud or on premises. Next is governing how data protection should be used. How personal data should be used. So this is identifying the context that the data is being used and accessed within your business. So this can be like classifying what business unit does the data fall into, for example, HR, finance, and marketing perspectives, and documenting and defining policies, roles, and responsibilities for the management and use of that personal data. So at different stages of the life cycle of that document within your organization, there's different roles and responsibilities around that. So that really needs to be defined. And also data classification. So organizing and labeling data to ensure proper handling. So, for example, the labeling of sensitivity of the data. So, for example, if it's personal, confidential, or top secret, all that needs to be defined there. Who is the owner? Who are the admins and the users? And next is to establish the security controls to prevent, detect, respond to any data breaches. So essentially, this is the ultimate goal of what GDPR wants to enforce. A key requirement of GDPR is protecting personal data from data leakage. No matter where it's sent, processed, or stored. This could be inside or outside the organization. From the device to the servers or even into the cloud. So the first part of this requirement is to initially plan and put the security controls in place, or the technology to prevent, detect, and respond to vulnerabilities and data breaches. So this could be, physically securing access to data center, to your data center or sites that have, access to physical kit. network security, identity management, encryption, and also end-user device protection. As previously mentioned, GDPR has a requirement that in the event of a breach, you have 72 hours to notify the authorities and customers about the breach. At that point, you'll be required to readily provide further details of the breach. So, how did the breach occur? What information was leaked? What was the impact of that breach? So the security solution needs to have the ability to monitor and detect system breaches, and a documented plan in place to detail what happens at each phase, from the moment that the breach is identified to the planned response, through to the notifying of the authorities and customer within the 72 hours time frame. So this protect step is not only about implementing the security features that, for example, can be leveraged from the Windows 10 security stack, but also really it's going to be about actually documenting how you're currently protecting that data, and what happens in the event of a breach. And then there's record keeping and reporting tools. So this is to establish a process to document the process for requesting that information, be it from the customer whose data you hold, or from the authorities. So this will ensure the entire process is audited, and then you can prove you took the appropriate steps based on the requirements. So this could be in the scenario where a breach occurs, or there is a request for information. You have the audits and reports in place to be able to extract the information requirements, to have the ability to respond to the types of requests that you get, and therefore satisfy the requirements of GDPR. So here on this slide, there are record keeping and the reporting capabilities that are required by GDPR. So how does Windows 10 help support GDPR compliance? And what are the tools are there in Windows 10 that can be leveraged to help you achieve GDPR compliance? As we know, a key part of GDPR requirement is classifying, protecting, and protecting the personal data and the sensitive data, and providing breach detection and audit and reporting capabilities. So let's map the GDPR requirement to the Windows 10 security features that can be leveraged today. So how do you meet the requirement to govern how personal data is used and accessed within your organization, with Windows 10 in mind, to ensure GDPR compliance? So remember, this is defining policies, roles and responsibilities for the management and use of personal data at different stages of the life cycle of that document or that data. And the answer is Windows Information Protection. So let's briefly look at Windows Information Protection, or WIP. So you might have heard about Enterprise Data Protection. So Microsoft have rebranded this recently as Windows Information Protection since the Windows 10 Anniversary Edition. It's basically accidental data leak prevention technology. So it protects data at rest, or whether it's in use. It's platform integrated, so you don't have to flip back and forth into different modes. So WIP policies can be deployed to protect corporate data on a personal and corporate devices, but without impacting user productivity and experience. To prevent data leakage to unauthorized users unintentionally or accidentally, and public services through email, social media, and public cloud, and be able to tell the difference between personal and corporate data. So WIP really is designed to prevent data leakage and mark what is corporate and personal data. The corporate data remains identifiable and separated from the personal data. So this is done through the encryption technology built in. So only IT allowed applications that you define in the policy can actually see that data. And through the policies, you can actually control, a remote selected wipe of the corporate data on that device, or revoke access to files, or prevent copy and paste between applications. And then it provides the same seamless experience for the user across mobile or desktop or even laptop platforms. Okay, great. So how do you actually administer and deploy these policies then? So with domain joined Windows 10 devices, you can actually configure and deploy the Windows information protection policies from SCCM. Alternatively, you can enroll your Windows 10 device, so obviously that could be a desktop, laptop, or phone, into Intune, and therefore you can actually configure and deploy the Windows information protection policy from Intune. So that's how it gets its policies, but that also allows the device to actually create the encryption keys also. So at a high level, there's three basic policies that you could put down. Now let's take a look at how this looks within the SCCM console. So let's quickly just jump into the SCCM console. Okay, and we go into configuration items, and let's quickly create a policy so we can see the settings and discuss those. So all this something, and select the Windows 10 platform for config manager manage devices, and then we can pick the Windows information protection settings. Right, yeah, so here we can actually do the magic to configure the policy, and as you can see here, we have the app rules. So you can specify app rules. So this gives you the list of applications that you actually want to permit access to your business data, basically, or deny. And if we come down here, then we can actually set the boundary around our network. So that could be in the cloud, to say like OneDrive for business, to be marked as work only. So this defines that the actual corporate network boundary to be protected by Windows information protection. So this works with the application rules and controls access to the actual network locations to be restricted only to the apps that meet the actual app criteria that you've defined in the app rules section list here. And then we have the actual application restriction policy settings here. So do you want to, for example, allow overrides? So that would allow the user to override the actual restriction there, or do you just want to be able to be strict and actually block copy and paste and sharing actions? So let's talk about how this kind of looks in practice. So to restrict copy and paste, so you can set policies to restrict copying of corporate data to your personal data. So if you set a policy that says override, the user will get a little reminder pop up, and the user can paste the data, but it is forced to actually confirm that it will be audited. Or you could just set a policy to say just block. You can restrict what apps can actually open certain files. So another thing is you could set a policy so only work sanctioned applications get access to work data. So if you try to open a corporate work file that contains secret information, WordPad for example, and it's not on the list of sanctioned apps, you get the access denied. Also in the menu to pick the application, each application will have a caption to say if it can open work or personal or both files. So everybody uses Outlook. If you try to move a work email into, say, your personal Hotmail mailbox, you can get the protection boundary. So override and audit or straight block. When data comes into the application over the network, if it's an enlightened application, so what that means is an application that is actually able to apply that protection, Windows Information Protection policy, then it knows to encrypt the data. So that is to be protected by Windows Information Protection. Also can have the briefcase icon. So that is configurable in the policy. So the briefcase icon gives a visual indication that that piece of data is actually being protected by Windows Information Protection. When data leaves the actual application, there are several ways it can be protected. So you can save it to a corporate folder like OneDrive for Business. Anything you drop into a corporate protected folder automatically gets encrypted. Over the network or between applications, an enlightened application can maintain the protection there too. So between app to app, you can tell Windows that the application is currently handling corporate data in that particular session, and then Windows will take care of all those protections. For example, the restriction of drag and drop or copy and paste. And over the network, you can tell whether an endpoint is corporate or not. So, for example, if you're handling corporate data, you don't send it to a personal context, which is quite important. Okay, so that's Windows Information Protection in a nutshell. So let's jump back into the slides. So the next requirement, how would you meet the requirement to govern how personal data is being used and accessed within your organization with Windows 10 to ensure GDPR compliance? So remember, this is the ability to protect your data, to prevent attacks, and detect and respond to any breaches. So the answer is a number of solutions within the Windows 10 security stack. So Windows Hello, Credential Guard, and Device Guard. So let's dig a little bit deeper on how these technologies actually work. So one of the biggest security issues is actually passwords. So in Windows Hello for Business, there is credential theft. So these kind of threats and breaches always seem to make the headlines news nowadays. So let's look at Windows Hello for Business. So one of the biggest security issues is actually passwords. So credential theft, these kind of threats and breaches always seem to make the headline news. Passwords are shared secrets, so when somebody is using a password, it's actually a secret that is being shared with the client and the server. So this makes it easy to be breached by being incepted and stolen or phished through social engineering. Users share passwords with co-workers. This is something that's almost impossible to control. So passwords are a problem, and there needs to be a way from moving away from passwords. And there clearly needs to be a solution that is better than passwords, and that's where Windows Hello for Business comes in. So Windows Hello credentials are breach, theft, and phish resistant. That's really because of the fact that, unlike passwords, the credentials are not based on shared secrets. It's basically based on asymmetrical keys. So how does Windows Hello work? It's based on a certificate or asymmetrical key pair. So what does that mean? Well, you set up Windows Hello, it generates a public and private key pair. So the private key is tied to the device, to the TPM chip, and the public key is tied to the account. So it's stored to the TPM chip, whether it's on Azure AD or on-premises AD, or it could be even your Microsoft account if you're using the consumer based scenario of Windows Hello. To the user, it's one of the gestures, right? So it's either to access the device, it's a PIN, or it could be a biometric, or device that they're using needs to support that. To set up Windows Hello, you have to go through a bootstrapping process. So because Windows Hello is a two-factor authentication credential, the user needs to go through a proofing process to set that up at the beginning. So that could be a one-time password to set that up, to link that with your account, or a code that's sent to your phone. So based on those proofs, the validation is completed and the user is granted a Windows Hello credential, which is linked to your AD account. Okay, so now let's look at Credential Guard. So versions prior to Windows 10 store credentials in the Local Security Authority, or LSA. The OS accesses the credentials using the remote procedure call, or RPC calls. Problem with this is it makes it possible for malware and hackers that have access to steal the credential, so the NTLM hash and the Kerberos tickets, and use it for pass the hash and pass the ticket attacks. And Credential Guard mitigates this threat by storing the credentials in a virtual container that's not accessible by the rest of the operating system. So even if malware gets on the device, even with running admin privileges, it will not get access to the credentials stored in the virtualized environment. So quick look at the requirements. We need 64-bit architecture, specifically Windows 10 Enterprise Edition, and the device needs to support TPM 2.0 and UEFI 2.3.1 firmware standard. And how do we go about enabling Credential Guard? Well, it's simple to set up. It's literally a group policy setting, and can be deployed using group policy, SCCM, or even PowerShell. Now, let's look at Device Guard, which is not as simple to set up and manage. So in a nutshell, Device Guard is a way to give admins full control over what code or software is allowed to run versus not run on their devices. So it provides security against malware and zero-day attacks, in particular zero-day attacks, because traditional antivirus solutions require virus definitions to be updated, so could be slow to fix the vulnerability in time before a breach. So Device Guard does this by blocking any installable software or apps other than those trusted by your organization. So it's like a model where you don't trust anything unless it's corporately defined software. Now, these apps are signed by specific software vendors or the Windows Store, and by your own organization using tools to sign the software that may not have been originally signed by the software vendors themselves. When an app attempts to install, Windows 10 determines whether the app is considered trusted by organization. So basically, Windows 10 alerts the user and prevents the app from being installed. Device Guard uses hardware and virtualization technology to isolate the untrusted apps from the rest of the OS. So by doing this helps provide protection from attackers and the malware that have managed to get inside your network and gain full system admin privileges there. Practices recommended Device Guard should be used in combination with traditional AV technologies like Windows Defender or third-party vendors to cover areas that Device Guard doesn't, for example, like macros within documents. So how do we define these corporate whitelisted signed applications that your organization trusts? Well, you do this through deploying code integrity policies. You can deploy code integrity policies using group policy, which is basically a manifest of the digital digitally signed whitelisted apps. And then you can use App Locker, which Device Guard uses to allow you to define a whitelist of apps that are allowed to run on your system. So this blocks any app that is not digitally signed by Microsoft or your organization. So apps must be whitelisted and digitally signed there. So how do you go about creating the code integrity policy to define the whitelisted signed apps and also get them signed as well by Microsoft? Well, there's two options. The first is to work within the Windows Store for Business, which basically offers a Device Guard signing portal. This signing portal within Windows Store for Business can actually give you an enterprise PKI and help you configure your own code signing for the enterprise. So in that way you can upload the file and get it signed there. The other option is to do a full system scan of a device that's representative of the devices that you would like this policy to apply to. So that represents the golden system, if you like, which represents the whitelisted apps, and upon that scan, when it's concluded, then you can deploy that and enforce that policy. Then going forward, as you identify new applications to bring into the whitelist, you add other apps to the code integrity policy, and this can be done using an executable called package inspector. This basically scans this application as it's being installed and then signs that catalog file. It's a bit of a longer process, and deploying code integrity policies in either of these methods is going to be a challenging way to maintain the code integrity policies in your environment as new applications are being introduced as well. However, having said that, there's a better way of doing it now, which is more dynamic, and the answer to that is by leveraging new SCCM current branch capabilities, so System Center Configuration Manager current branch, with the new Creators Edition of Windows 10 1703 and System Center Configuration Manager. The recommendation is to deploy Device Guard and App Locker in managed installer mode. This makes the management of an approved application environment substantially easier. Approved application model basically both rationalizes the application estate while also increasing security by limiting the applications that can run within the environment, effectively making it very difficult for malware to execute. So basically, only tested, approved, and packaged applications via System Center Configuration Manager, so in your defined software catalog, can be deployed to the end user estate, rather than end users having administrative privileges or permissions or to install applications themselves. So less of the shadow IT there. So with the combination of both Windows 10 Device Guard, App Locker, and Config Manager, this can be relatively easily achieved through the integration of these three technologies. So to summarize, managed installer mode, what this means is that if the application is approved and packaged for deployment with Config Manager, then it will be allowed to execute. If it's not deployed via Config Manager, then execution will be denied. And it's relatively easier to deploy this model as well. Okay, let's look at the next requirement. So how do you meet the requirement to keep required documentation, manage data requests, and breach notifications with Windows 10 to ensure GDPR compliance? And the answer is Windows Defender Advanced Threat Protection, or ATP. So just to recap, This could be in the scenario when a breach occurs or there's a request for information. You have the audits and the reports in place to be able to extract the information requirements, to have the ability to respond to the types of requests that you get, and therefore satisfy the requirements of GDPR, being able to respond within that 72 hours time frame. So let's now look at Windows Defender Advanced Threat Protection capabilities to detect and respond. At some point there will be perhaps a zero-day threat or misconfiguration, therefore you have to assume that you're already breached. More disturbingly, a lot of attacks are actually happening without the use of malware at all, which obviously won't be picked up by anti-malware solutions. This is where Windows Defender Advanced Threat Protection comes into play. Windows Defender Advanced Threat Protection is a sensor built into Windows 10 since the anniversary update, so the 1607 build. So there's no additional deployment involved to use this service. It's not Windows Defender, which, as you know, is the anti-malware solution provided by Microsoft. Windows Defender Advanced Threat Protection actually runs alongside Windows Defender or any other malware solution, any other third-party provider. It doesn't actually have to be Windows Defender. So Windows Defender Advanced Threat Protection is not actually taking care of that malware. It doesn't take care of the function of the actual malware solution which works with it. It's actually looking at advanced targeted attacks based on behavior. That's actually what it's doing. So it logs all kind of events and activities that are happening on the machine and sends all that data to the cloud. So every customer has their own Windows Defender Advanced Threat Protection tenant. That's where all the machine learning gets applied and all the security analytics and logic happens all in the cloud. So through the Windows Defender Advanced Threat Protection portal, you get access to your data, your alerts, and the attack timeline. So for onboarding Windows Defender Advanced Threat Protection, you can use group policy, SCCM, Intune, all the traditional deployment tools. Obviously, the agent is already built in to Windows 10, but all you have to do is to turn it on and tell the client where to send the data to. So there is a very rich timeline for investigation. So you can kind of go back in time. You can get some options on historical data retention. How you want to, how long you want to keep the data, so that when you get alerted of attack, you can go back in time and see the breadcrumb trail of the attack and investigate that. The Microsoft security team get unique threat intelligence from various sources. This data comes from the services like that Microsoft get, from all these services that are integrated with, say, like Office 365, URL data retrieved from Windows 10 features like Smart Screen. So by the way, Smart Screen prevents you from going to well-known malicious websites. This blocks around 97% of threats and works out of the box really in Windows 10. So Microsoft also retrieves telemetry from their own endpoints, and also Microsoft have threat intelligence that is coming from their own hunter groups and third-party providers also. So now let's give you a quick tour of what Windows Defender ATP looks like. So I've signed into our Windows ATP tenant here, and you immediately land on the dashboard. You have information about active alerts. So these are alerts that are happening. We've selected to only see the last 30 days, and there are no alerts for the last 30 days, which is why we're not seeing anything. But usually you would see a timeline here of actual alerts of attacks happening maybe in your environment. So you have a section of machines at risk. So these are simply machines that are stacked by alert activities on them. We can drill down into this and this will show us the machine list. Then you have some health index indicators. So the service health here, the sensor health on clients, and also we have an aggregated number of total machines over time. that you have onboarded. So to give you a good indication, for example, if you've deployed it to maybe 1,000 machines and now you see only 100, then you know that you've got a problem. Then you have this section with machines with active malware alerts. This is a section that will present anti-malware activity if you're running Windows Defender for, the anti-malware of choice, not a third party. Then this information will actually be in this pane here. So we can drill down further into the alerts queue. And then if you click on a specific alert, there's attacker information and profile information, and this represents the intelligence threat. So what do they do? What are their interests? What are the recommended actions? If you scroll down, you can see the incident graph, which is designed to give you the scope of breach in a dynamic graph. So example, for this machine here, we can open up and see the different files here that together make this attack happen. When you click on a specific node, it shows you that this file is prevalent on other machines as well, if that is the case, and we'll give you the list of the other machines in the tree. So pay attention to these machines when you're doing this investigation. So you can zoom in into that particular file as well to gain more information. So how prevalent is this file worldwide? How prevalent is this file within your company? Obviously, files that have a low prevalence number worldwide, but is prevalent within your company should raise a red flag, because chances are you're being hit by a targeted attack right now. There's also a detonation service whereby you can send the file to the cloud for further analysis to understand what it actually does. And then you have the ability to zoom into a specific machine here. These are the specific alerts that were fired on this specific machine. And then if you click on a specific alert, it can take you back. It can take you back in time. And this is the timeline experience. And these are all the events that were recorded within the Windows Defender Advanced Threat Protection. So these tools give you the ability to detect when a breach occurs and respond to the request for information within that 72-hour timeline. So, are you ready for GDPR compliance? So now we all know that all companies processing personal data with the EU are responsible to comply with the General Data Protection Regulation from the 25th of May 2018. So there's still time, but obviously a lot of planning is involved. So how can PowerON help? PowerON can help you deliver a well-architected IT infrastructure to support your GDPR implementation plan by leveraging tools available in Azure, Windows 10, Enterprise Mobility Suite, and SQL Server. PowerON's Solution Alignment Workshop, in particular, will help you establish the Microsoft solutions available to support your chosen GDPR implementation strategy. So during our Solution Discovery Workshop, our specialist consultants will work with your internal teams to deliver a combination of immersive demonstrations and technical whiteboarding to help you identify key Microsoft technologies. By helping you review the components of Microsoft solutions relevant to your business, PowerON can show you how to align these products to technical requirements of your GDPR strategy. The workshops will also identify the realities of implementing these solutions into your organization. So here's a link to some more information here. So the first link is to the Information Commissioner's Office site, which gives you a lot of further information on GDPR. There's also a link to Microsoft's guidance for GDPR, simply microsoft.com/GDPR. And the final link there is a link to the PowerON's view on GDPR and our contact details. And with that, I think that's the end of the slides, I believe. All that remains is to answer any questions. By the way, there is a survey at the end of the webinar, so we would appreciate it if you could take the time to complete this to provide us feedback on this session. Thank you.